Hello student, this is Pallad Rabari, your host, and you're watching Pallad Rabari classes. In this video, we will discuss Macroeconomics Class 12th, Determination of Income and Employment, Chapter 3. This is the third volume of the chapter, Determination of Income and Employment. Let us see the topic that we will discuss in this video. In this video, we will discuss derivation of saving function from consumption function. We will discuss determination of equilibrium through aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach. We will also discuss determination of equilibrium through saving and investment approach. Let us start the derivation of saving function from consumption function. In this graph, Y is the aggregate supply or national income. It is always being represented by the 45-degree line. C is the consumption function. S is the supply curve. A is the break-even point. At the break-even point, supply is at the break-even point, saving is 0. So what is break-even point? It is the point when the consumption becomes equal to income. When the consumption becomes equal to income, it means that the saving is 0, because whatever the money we have earned, we have spent it. Try to see through the observations in the upper panel. Listen, this is the upper panel and this is the lower panel. So in the upper panel of the diagram, this line represents the consumption curve. 45-degree line is the aggregate supply curve. This red line, that is a 45-degree line, represents the aggregate supply curve. Aggregate supply is always equal to national income, so it can also be represented by Y. It has the property, why it is being represented by the 45-degree line? Because it has the property that each point on the line is equidistant from x-axis and y-axis. It means that whatever be the point on the x-axis will be equidistant. It means consumption will become always equal to the income. Here we presume that whatever we are consuming is equal to income. In other words, at the point on 45-degree line, income is equal to consumption. C bar means autonomous consumption, that is consumption at 0 level of income. Corresponding to C bar in the consumption function, there is minus autonomous consumption. In the lower panel, we can see that there is minus autonomous consumption. In the saving function in the lower panel, that is what it means, that is at 0 level of income there is negative saving. The saving panel, we can say that there is minus autonomous consumption. Minus autonomous consumption means what it means, when the income is 0, the person has to borrow the money from outsider. The question is how much money they will borrow. The money which is being needed for the minimum consumption, that is autonomous consumption, will be borrowed. That is the main reason minus autonomous consumption is always equal to this saving. At the point A, here at the point A, the 45-degree line intersect the consumption curve. We can say that at the point A, consumption curve and the aggregate supply is equal. It means that at the point A, income and consumption both are equal. This implies at the point A, whole of the income is spent on consumption. Therefore, the saving is 0. In the lower panel, we can say that at this point, corresponding to the lower panel, we can say that the saving is 0. What it means? It means whatever the money the person is earning, the same everything is being consumed. So the saving is 0. That is the main reason it is being called break-even point. The corresponding to the lower panel that we have seen, saving is 0. To the left of the point A, to the left of the point A, consumption, we can say that consumption is greater than income. When the consumption is greater than income, what it means? It means that the saving is negative. In the lower panel, we can say that the saving is negative. This result in dissaving. To the right of the break-even point, we can say that the consumption is less and the income is greater. What it means? It means that the saving is there. So here we can say that the saving is positive. Thus some part of the income is saved, which is equal to the difference between income and consumption. In a single graph, let us see consumption, that is a 45-degree line, national income, that is a saving, that is a break-even point. Before this point, break-even point, we are having dissaving, saving is negative. After break-even point, we are having saving because the income is greater than consumption. I hope the point is clear to everyone. Now let us see the next topic, that is determination of equilibrium level of income and output. According to the Keynesian theory, equilibrium condition is generally stated in terms of aggregate demand and aggregate supply. In economy, or we can say economy is in equilibrium when aggregate demand for goods and services is equal to aggregate supply during the period of time. So equilibrium is achieved when aggregate demand becomes equal to aggregate supply. We know that aggregate demand is the sum total of consumption and investment. So we can say that aggregate demand is equal to consumption plus investment. Also we know aggregate supply is saving plus consumption. If we subtract second and third, we will get consumption plus saving equal to consumption plus investment. If we add these two, from these two obviously we can say that consumption plus saving is equal to consumption plus investment. Consumption is common, so consumption can be cancelled. We can say that saving will be equal to investment. It means according to Keynesian, there are two approaches for determining the equilibrium level of income and employment in the economy. One is the aggregate demand, aggregate supply, and the second one is saving and investment approach. The equilibrium level of income output can be studied using the following two approaches that we have seen. The first one is aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach, and the second one is saving and investment approach. In the equilibrium level of income and employment, following assumption is there. Let us see the assumption which we follow. The first assumption is the determination of equilibrium output is said to be studied in the context of two-sector model. The first assumption is equilibrium level of income and output is studied in two-sector model. When I say two-sector model, it means we presume that in the economy household owned and the firms are there. No government interventions and no foreign sector is participating. Assumption 2 is it is assumed that investment expenditure is autonomous. Here we presume that there is autonomous investment. When I say autonomous investment, it means investment is constant. Investment will not change with the income. Third assumption is we presume that the price level is assumed to remain constant. Price level will be unchanged. Fourth assumption is equilibrium output is to be determined in context of short run. I mean here the assumption we presume that the equilibrium of output will be determined in short run, not long run. Now let us determine the equilibrium by aggregate demand and aggregate supply approach. Firstly, let us see the meaning. The equilibrium level of income output employment is determined where planned level of aggregate demand is equal to planned level of aggregate supply. Try to understand it through the schedule. Listen, in this schedule, income will be presented by Y. This is the income, that is consumption, that is saving, that is induced investment, that is aggregate demand, that is aggregate supply. Here we presumed that the investment, that is the autonomous investment, is 100 crore. In the case of the consumption, in previous chapter we know that consumption means autonomous consumption plus induced consumption. Autonomous consumption is the consumption which remains constant irrespective of disposable income. So here the autonomous consumption is 50 and the induced consumption is 0.5 Y. Clear? So by putting it accordingly, we just calculate the consumption. When the income is 0, consumption is 50, it means 50 plus 0 becomes 50. Saving means income minus consumption, it means 0 minus 50, that is minus 50. Induced investment is 100. Aggregate demand becomes 50. What is aggregate demand? It means consumption plus investment. 50 plus 100 is equal to 150. Aggregate saving, it means saving plus consumption, that is 50 minus 50 is 0. When the income is 100, consumption will be 50 plus 0.5 multiplied by 100, it will become 100. Saving will be 100 minus 100, that is 0. Autonomous investment will be 100. Aggregate demand will become consumption plus investment, that is 200. Aggregate saving becomes consumption plus saving, that is 100 plus 0, that is 100. In the same way, when the income becomes 200, consumption becomes 150. How? 50 plus 0.5 multiplied by 200. Saving becomes 200 minus 150, that is 50. Autonomous will be the same. Aggregate demand will become 150 plus 100, that is 250. And aggregate saving will become, aggregate supply will become consumption plus saving, that is 300 rupees, 300 crore. In the same way, we just calculate the aggregate demand and supply when the income is 300, 400 and 500. Listen, as I told you, the consumer will attain, or the market will attain equilibrium when the aggregate demand becomes equal to aggregate supply. We can say that aggregate demand and aggregate supply is equal when aggregate demand is 300 crore and the aggregate supply is also 300 crore. And that is possible when the income is 300. So aggregate demand becomes equal to aggregate supply when the income is 300. So the equilibrium or the full employment level will be attained when the income is 300, because when the income is 300, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Remember one thing, when the income is less than 300, we can see that the aggregate demand more than equilibrium level of income or equilibrium level of output and employment. We can see that aggregate demand is less than aggregate supply, so the situation will be of excess aggregate supply. So when the income is more, there will be excess aggregate supply, and when the income is less, there will be excess aggregate demand. Try to see it through the graph. In this graph, we can see this line represents aggregate demand, 45-degree line represents aggregate supply or equal to national income. This is the equilibrium point of full employment level. Why it is called the full employment level? Because at this point E, aggregate supply becomes equal to aggregate demand. Aggregate demand always start from the y-axis. Why? Because when the income is 0, we can say here the income is 0, there might be some consumption. So equilibrium level of output is OM, because when the equilibrium at OM level of output, employment or income, aggregate demand is equal to aggregate supply. Try to see the observations. AD is the aggregate demand curve and is equal to C plus I in the two-sector economy. Consumption plus investment. Investment means autonomous investment. AS is the total amount of goods and services or the national income. E is the equilibrium level of income and output. At this level, aggregate supply is equal to aggregate demand. Now let us see two things. Let us see if the national income is, or the income is less than equilibrium level of income, what will be the result? When the income is OM1, we can see that aggregate demand is more than aggregate supply. Let us see what will happen. In case 1, here we can say when the national income is OM1, aggregate demand exceeds aggregate supply. Here we can say aggregate demand is more and aggregate supply is less. We can say aggregate supply is less and demand is more. Then it implies a situation where the total demand for goods and services is more than the total supply of goods and services. When the income is less, what will happen? The demand is more and the supply is less. Demand more, supply less. This implies a situation of excess demand. Due to the excess demand, the producer draw down their inventory and increase the production. When the demand exceeds, what happens? The producer start taking out the raw material from their godowns, hiring the factor services so that the production should be increased to meet out the increased demand. When the producer start hiring more and more factors of production, thereby increase the employment level and income. When the more and more factor services will be hired, what will happen? The employment will increase, yes or no? The output will increase, yes or no? The income will increase, yes or no? Thereby increase employment and income. Finally, the income will rise and equate to aggregate demand with aggregate supply. Thus, the equilibrium is restored again. I hope the point is clear. I repeat the same thing. When the income is less, the situation is of excess demand. To counter the problems of excess demand, the producer will start taking the raw material out, hiring the factor services. So what will happen when the factor services will increase? It means the income will increase. Income in the economy will increase. And finally, what happens? Finally, the income will reaches to the level of OM and the equilibrium will be restored. That happens when the aggregate demand is greater than aggregate supply. Now let us see the next thing. Suppose if the aggregate supply, suppose the income is greater than full employment level of income or equilibrium level of income. Here we can say when the income is M2, aggregate supply exceeds aggregate demand. In case aggregate supply exceeds aggregate demand, that it implies the situation where the total supply of goods and services is more than total demand for goods and services. It means supply is more and the demand is less. This implies a situation of deficit demand. It means demand is less. Due to the deficit demand, what will happen? The producer experience piling up of stock of unsold goods. What it means? It means that the producer will be left with unsold stock. This would face the problems of cut back the production, thereby results in the reduced employment of factors of production. To solve the problem, what the producer will do? They will decrease the production. When the producer will decrease the production, what will happen? Employment will decrease, and with the fall in employment, the income will decrease. And finally, the national income will comes down to the original position, that is OM, and the equilibrium will be restored. Now let us see the determination of income employment through the saving and investment approach. According to this approach, the equilibrium is determined at that point where the saving and investment are equal to each other. In other words, equilibrium is established where leakage are equal to injections. Remember one thing, saving means leakage and the investment means injections. So equilibrium will be established when the saving and investment or leakage and injections are equal. Try to see the same thing. Here we can say the income is there, consumption is there, saving is there, investment is there, aggregate demand, aggregate supply is there. As I told you, the equilibrium will be restored when the saving and investment is equal. Let us see when the saving and investment is equal. Saving and investment is equal when the income is 300 crore. When the income is 300 crore, saving is 100 crore and the investment is also 100 crore. So the equilibrium level of income is determined when the national income is 300 crore, because when the income is 300 crore, the saving and the investment is equal, that is 100 and 100 crore. Try to see the same thing through the graph. Listen, S is the saving curve. It always starts from the y-axis negative. I is the investment curve, which is parallel to x-axis, because in the two-sector economy we presume that the investment is autonomous investment. E is the equilibrium point, because it indicates that at this point saving and investment is equal. This diagram, SS represent the saving curve and II represent the investment curve. The investment curve is a horizontal line that we can see, as it represents the autonomous investment. The point E represents the equilibrium point where the saving curve SS and the investment curve II intersects. Accordingly, OQ is the equilibrium level of income output. So what is the equilibrium level? OQ. Try to see if the equilibrium level of income, if the income is OQ1 level, if the national income is less than equilibrium level of income, if the national income is Q1, we can see that the investment is more and the saving is less. Let us see what happens. In this situation, the investment exceeds the saving. The situation when the investment exceeds saving, that we can see over here, that is at OQ1 level of income. Injection into the circular flow of income is greater than withdrawal from the income. It means that the injection is more and the withdrawal is less. It means that more investment is coming and the less withdrawal is going on. Then it implies that the total consumption expenditure is greater than what is required to purchase the available supply of goods. In this situation, we can see if the investment is more, what it means? It means that the consumption is more. Investment is more means what? It means that the consumption is more consumption, and the supply of the goods is less. In other words, to understand this, we can say that there will be as we can see over here, the consumption is more and the saving is less. It means what? It means that the availability of the goods in the market is less, but the demand is more demand is generating. So what the producer will do, the producer will increase the production, take the raw materials out of the godowns, hire the factor services. When the factor services will be hired, the employment will increase and lead to the rise in the aggregate income in the economy. Consequently, with the increase in income, what will happen? When the income increase, the saving will automatically increase, because the saving totally depends upon income. So saving will continue to rise until it becomes equal to investment. At point where saving and investment becomes equal, the equilibrium point will be restored. So here we have seen what will happen when the investment exceeds supply. Another thing, suppose the national income is more than equilibrium level of income. Here we can say if the national income is OQ1, when the national income is more than equilibrium level of income, we can see that the saving is more and the investment is less. The situation when the saving exceeds investment, that is withdrawal from the income, is greater than injections into the circular flow of income. What it means? It implies that the consumption expenditure is less and the supply is more. It means demand is less and the supply is more. In other words, we can say that what will happen, we can say that high saving implies low consumption, which means that the required output is less than the planned output. Thus, a portion of the supply remains unsold. When the supply is more, what will happen? The portion of the product, goods and supply will remain unsold. In response to this situation, for clearing this unsold stock, the producer plan to cut down the production. So what will happen? The employment will be stopped. The production will be stopped. When the production will stop, what will happen? It means less factor services will be hired. When the less factor services will hired, it means income will decrease. And when the income will decrease, the supply automatically start falling down and reaches to its original position, that is E. And here we can say that automatically the equilibrium will be restored. So here we have seen how the problem will be solved and what will happen when the supply exceeds investment. That's all I have in this video. Thanks for watching. God bless you all. Dear subscribers, if you have not subscribed my channel, please subscribe the channel and don't forget to press the bell icon so that whenever I upload the new video, you get the notification.